In October of 1999, GTA 2 released on both PlayStation 1 consoles and PCs around the world, arriving on the scene to generally mixed or average reviews. And in many ways, it was a work of art that was unfortunately caught between two worlds, if you will. The game was still a commercial success, of course, but the developers, DMA Design, were about to undergo an entire corporate rebrand and buyout, one that they were definitely not aware of at the time, and one that would ultimately shuffle the deck, so to speak, making this not only the last Grand Theft Auto game this original team of close-knitted college friends would ever work on, but also the last game this team would ever work on as DMA Design as well. And it all happened just a few short years prior to their creation, eventually going on to take over the world. It's a very fascinating story in my opinion. Thanks to things like hindsight, and nowadays it's pretty safe to say that GTA 2 wasn't quite the cultural earthquake that Grand Theft Auto 3 would go on to be just 2 years later. It was mainly a simple extension of the first game's formula, if you will, with the entire game being built on the same exact engine as the first game, and the only real improvements or differences in general being the tighter controls, both on foot and in vehicles, and the game's art direction. This GTA game occupies a stranger, less celebrated place in the franchise's grander history as a whole. It casually rests in a place that not too many people are willing to go to, not even the guys who spend hours talking about the lore of the Grand Theft Auto games on this very platform. In a lot of ways, GTA 2 gets swept under the rug at every opportunity, and I believe I have a clue as to why. I don't know for sure, of course, but I believe it's because both the game and the studio behind it were still trying to find their vision or footing, so to speak. It's also one of the last top-down titles, as far as the mainline entries in the franchise go, making it a final expression of the design language that had defined the series' roots before the ground was given a chance to truly shift or evolve. Meaning, it's not necessarily the easiest to go back to now that I've played all the future games. Plus, the fact that you have to jump through a lot of hoops just to download this game is also making it very skippable. Playing GTA 2 for the first time in my life at the age of 23 in 2025, this game feels less like a final destination for the series and more like a rest stop, like any one of the hundreds of visiting centers you see when entering a new state on a road trip. Yeah, you're technically there, but it's really just somewhere you're passing through on the way to where you're actually going, making everything apart from maybe one or two things very forgettable. At the time, the game was still being built/developed by DMA Design, the small Scottish studio that had made its name in the early 90s with titles like Lemmings, before pivoting towards the more strange and unruly experiment that was the very first Grand Theft Auto game in '97. But by 1999, the industry/landscape around DMA had shifted significantly since the iteration of the very first Grand Theft Auto game just 2 years prior. The happy-go-lucky atmosphere of a company founded by somewhat close friends was reportedly long gone, and perhaps more importantly, the rights to the GTA series no longer sat with its original publisher, BMG Interactive, either, which itself had been quietly absorbed and turned into a subsidiary of Take-Two Interactive sometime in late 1998, during business deals I wasn't even alive for, so I apologize if I got a few things wrong. This led to most of the original team that worked on these first two GTA games to be split up by either the members themselves leaving the company altogether, or by them giving new jobs or positions by Rockstar. Which isn't a bad thing by any means, don't get it twisted, but it does kind of mean that GTA 2 is a sort of the last bastion of its kind. Out of that corporate merger, though, came something completely new. The company known as Rockstar Games, a label birthed from the ashes of BMG Interactive and founded in part by Sam and Dan Houser. It was a Phoenix-like studio that promised to make video games not just as entertainment, but as cultural statements, with many of the staff working there believing that the medium of video games is a true opportunity to be just as creative and commercially marketable as movies or books. And so, while GTA 2 was very much a DMA project in terms of both design and development, it was still sold in stores around the world, marked and stamped with the Rockstar Games name and logo, which I think is an important detail to highlight. It was the very first game to carry that logo, and it was the beginning of a brand that would inevitably redefine how video games are perceived in the eyes of the public and to shareholders around the world, for better and for worse, kind of living up to what the company had imagined for in that way. I suppose it's also worth noting that, in this point in time, in 1998 to 99 roughly, Rockstar was only the publisher. DMA Design was still its own entity and a company/development studio and had not yet transitioned into Rockstar North quite yet. DMA was still operating outside of Dundee, Scotland, and were continuing to experiment with the odd mix of technical ambition and irreverent tone that had put their earlier work on the map. The two identities, the studio making the game and the publisher selling it, were technically aligned and operating as one in a business sense, of course, but not yet under the same name, if that makes it any easier to understand. I get it if this is too hard to follow though. I've looked into this a lot more than I probably should have, and I still can't really begin to lay out or piece any of it together in an accurate timeline in my head. There's a lot of corporate jargon mixed in all these sentences, and I don't even really fully understand it at times myself, if I'm being honest. But I've left everything I used as research as a source below in the video's description in the case that you want to fact check me, or you are genuinely curious about the history or whatever, so there's that. This sort of a transition of titles wouldn't officially happen until 2002 though, when DMA Design was officially renamed into Rockstar North, after the breakout success of Grand Theft Auto 3. From that point forward, the line blurred. The Scottish developers and the American label became one and the same for the most part. Or, in other words, the DNA of DMA Design, haha, see what I did there, folded permanently into the Rockstar identity. But if we were to rewind back to 1998, during the making of GTA2, I highly doubt anyone ever really saw any of this coming. They were just focused on expanding and innovating the GTA franchise to their best ability with as much creativity as possible, and I don't really think they did a bad job for what it's worth. So, what we got in this game, then, is a curious hybrid of a video game. It's a title with both the eccentric fingerprints of DMA Design, while also being framed and presented with this louder, more abrasive branding that Rockstar would later come to perfect. And that tension shows best in the game itself. Whereas the first Grand Theft Auto leaned heavily on parroting real-world cities in thin disguises, GTA 2 chose to do the exact opposite of that in almost every way, which is honestly why it sticks out to me so much. Instead, it abandons the real world altogether and chooses to set itself in a fictional location of a place called Anywhere City, which kinda feels like a strange hybrid of every map in the original GTA game plus its London DLC mushed together into one big map, but I'm not so sure if everybody else thinks that. To briefly describe it, it's a neon-lit sprawl of grime and corporate dystopia that gives a hell of a lot more cyberpunk or retro-futuristic-ish vibes, more so than I was expecting. It's not really satire with a specific target in mind per se, so much as it is just a societal critique in general, I suppose, as well as being a stage where technology and corruption overlap for the worse. And gangs have somehow managed to gain enough influence in the same kind of way a corporation or a company would. I'm not really sure how that happened, but that's kind of something that's just accepted in the GTA 2 universe. It's not an entirely original concept in itself, of course, but this was all new territory for DMA Design and the GTA franchise altogether, so you kinda gotta give credit where credit is due for them knocking it out of the water. I get the feeling that the whole idea here was to depict a world that has gone to shit, but has also managed to stay somewhat productive, at least at the most laziest and fundamentally lowest level possible. And you know, with the way things are looking nowadays, with companies constantly doing the bare minimum just to get by or to reach a certain quota, automating as much of the process as possible, maybe they were onto something, who knows. It was, in its own weird way, a city of transition in itself, maybe even resembling a little of what those very close employees were actually living through, or maybe how they were feeling in general about the things that were going on around them. From a very certain or specific point of view, this game is a direct representation of a company poised/positioned between its past and what it would eventually become under the Rockstar/Take-Two banner. Perhaps I'm just looking too deep into things for the sake of analysis, but still, I can't help but notice these little things when I look back at GTA 2 as both a game and a stepping stone in the GTA franchise. Whereas the first game dressed its satire in the thin caricature of American cities and the criminal underworld stereotypes that may accompany them, GTA 2 still does that second part, but it made the deliberate choice to set itself somewhere totally unreal and completely fictional. Even the name of it has a very tongue-in-cheek kind of vagueness to it. The world of GTA 2 is both futuristic and familiar, which is honestly a vibe I wish other game studios focused on creating games around, but that's besides the point. The entire game is filled with these interesting color combinations like chrome beside rust, neon signs beside overflowing trash, and of course, how could one forget the unique sightings of those semi-futuristic looking hover cars on top of the cracked pavement or dirty alleyways. It's something that doesn't really sound like much when I say it like that, but it definitely left an impression and is visually appealing. I get the vibe that this is a city designed to feel uncanny, but it's also trying to be somewhat familiar enough to the human eye that these little details can still be recognized, while also trying to remain abstract enough to keep players feeling slightly off balance or apprehensive at the same time. As if the whole setting were less a place and more of a mood of some kind. And at the center of all this is the guy that you're playing as, Claude Speed. Albeit he never really gets referred to as that through any of the in-game dialogue. To know that, you just have to have a copy of the in-game manual, but that's also beside the point. He's basically another one of those countless silent protagonists, and his identity is more or less shaped entirely by the player's imagination or choices, effectively turning him into whatever the hell you want to think he is. I know this was sort of the standard for video games at the time after all, but when you look back, it is a sharp contrast to Rockstar's later obsession with these highly authored and thoroughly detailed characters. Characters like Arthur Morgan, Nico Bellic, Trevor Phillips, or pretty much anyone from their later games. In GTA 2, the story isn't told through cutscenes either. It's told to the player through text box prompts coming from Claude's in-game pager. That in itself holds less characters than a modern-day tweet does. I thought the inclusion of a pager was pretty nice and fitting here since it's supposed to be the late 90s after all. Although I doubt anyone born after 2002 even knows what those things are. It's also kind of impressive that the developers were able to convey as much as they were given how restricted they were in terms of writing. Each faction offers their own mission chains that can be identified through these special color-coded payphones, which also reward players with points/money upon one's completion. But to access some of them, you first need to have enough respect. You know, when it comes to respect, I always thought that the Saints Row games were kind of the first ones to do that, but I had no idea that GTA 2 did it almost 6 years before them, albeit it does work a little differently in this game. To put it briefly, you can work with any gang, but working with one gang usually automatically makes you enemies with one of the few others. But this isn't necessarily always the case. It just kind of randomly happens on the flip of a dime from what I gathered. Which in return makes these haphazard neighborhoods and random parts of the map turn into active war zones, where you will definitely be attacked on sight if you're wandering around them for too long, creating these special kind of a wrong place or wrong time situations, which I thought was pretty cool. I think the reason this mechanic is so fun though is not only because it's kind of unheard of in the realm of video games, but it's also because it incentivizes a betrayal. Betrayal and crime games kind of go hand to hand in my opinion. And more importantly maybe, it puts the player behind the wheel of their own story. As the player, you have the complete authority to build trust with one crime group, take what you need when you need it, and then flip alliances whenever you see fit, and watch the chaos ripple through the streets as you start doing missions with this shiny new gang, who have no idea that the same thing is probably and most likely going to happen to them as well. It's messy, it makes you unpredictable, and is surprisingly effective as a form of storytelling. And not even to mention, the whole sequence is just amusing to pull off in-game as well, and makes for an interesting gameplay loop, I have to admit. The game's live-action intro is also worth mentioning, I suppose, since I did just bring it up and since it's the first thing players are forced to see upon booting up the game and whatnot. Instead of an animated cutscene or some kind of in-engine prologue, GTA 2 opens up with a short film shot on location in New York City. It's grainy, overexposed, unmistakably late 90s in both production and aesthetic, and it even stars Scott Mawson as a leather-clad criminal stand-in for the player character Claude Speed. It's certainly a little campy in hindsight, but it speaks volumes about the ambition behind the project if anything. This short film was directed by Alex de Rakoff and scripted in part by a young Dan Houser, who even makes a small cameo in the intro, playing one of the guys riding in a van. But take that with a grain of salt, I only ever found one article talking about that. I know it's pretty easy to dismiss this small sequence of events with how monumental and massive Rockstar have grown as a company in today's world, but I think it's also pretty important to remember that this is the first time Houser ever began openly shaping the voice of the series, blending his very own unique version of pulp violence based on what he himself had either seen in crime movies or read about during his youth. Although Houser himself recently admitted in a surprise interview with Lex Friedman that he played a very small role when it comes to his work on GTA 2, this is ultimately and undeniably where he started. And whether he knew it at the time or not, he would later go on to do great things with this very company. And it all started with this short little promotional video he and the rest of the team helped film while they were visiting New York City, a place that would later come to be a staple in their games. This short film is as unconditional as it gets, and it shows the studio inching towards things like narrative ambition and even, dare I say, coherent storytelling, and also towards the kind of atmosphere that would later define the better parts of Rockstar's work. Dan Houser would eventually become one of Rockstar's many creative voices, with him famously being credited for his work on pretty much all of the scripts the company has produced from GTA 3 to Red Dead Redemption 2, which is a hell of a catalog of work if I may add. But here, in 1999, I think it's important to remember that he was just an ambitious writer who had just gotten his literature degree from Oxford University, and was still trying to find his footing, I guess you could say. GTA 2 feels, in many ways, like the inevitable continuation of an idea that was already sort of too big for its frame. The first game had already successfully laid that groundwork and established what does work and what doesn't work, so to speak, and GTA 2 sought to be as experimental with that formula as possible, while also remaining somewhat true to it as well, as bizarre as that sounds. The game is still about stealing cars, outrunning the police, and climbing your way through the city's gang hierarchies, of course, but under that hood of the mechanics, the design begins to resemble something far more familiar, something that's honestly more to the likes of the future open-world formula that Rockstar would eventually go on to popularize/pioneer in the years ahead. I was actually shocked to see that most of the trends that plague the open-world games in today's world are also somewhat prevalent in GTA 2, a game that came out in 1999, long before games like these were like a staple of some kind. If anything, it's proof that DMA Design and partially Rockstar could cater to criticism if needed to. The map itself is proof of this, if anything, in my opinion. Navigation, for instance, feels far more approachable than the 3 separate stylized cityscapes of the first game, and both of its respected expansion pack maps combined. It's much easier to orient yourself in this game, and while the minimap hadn't yet become a feature, it still feels like the city itself is designed with the player in mind this time around, which is a praise I cannot lend to the first game. Its roads and landmarks are able to gently guide you without the need of a colorful arrow constantly pointing you to the correct way, although it's gonna stay there whether you like it or not. To be fair though, at least the arrow in GTA 2 is far less intrusive or screen hoggy as the one in the first game, so there's that, I guess. I don't know about you, but the arrow always just confused me more than it helped me in the first game. Maybe that's just me though, who knows. You could clearly tell that the map wasn't just a container for random missions now, although it still features a plethora of them, don't get it twisted. It was more or less deliberately being treated as a sandbox this time around. Well, both games' maps are technically sandboxes, but GTA 2 gives you a lot more toys, I'll put it that way. Beyond the color-coded payphones that kicked off these specific gang assignments, Anywhere City is littered with a ton of minor distractions to keep the player playing as long as humanly possible. With collectibles in the form of the game's logo tucked into random alleyways and on top of rooftops and pretty much scattered around the entire map, import and export missions returning just like from the previous game, the occasional discovery of a stunt jump, and even odd little challenges and minigames placed in lonely corners of streets that most players probably would only stumble onto by accident. At least that's how I found them anyway. These weren't just simple extras or secret levels like earlier video games might feature. These were statements of intent by an ambitious company looking to innovate their creation as much as possible. By placing rewards and curiosities outside of the main mission path, DMA was nudging players into treating the city as a space worth exploring for its own sake, because it's something that's just fun to do, and not just because some high-pitched mumbling text box told you to do it. Today, this kind of level/map design is pretty much expected in open-world games. And if you were a developer and your studio decided to not care about this feature of an open-world game and or its atmosphere in general while developing an open-world game in the modern age, you and your quote-unquote product would be ridiculed and critiqued to no end by practically anyone and everyone who could. But in 1999, this was a small but forward-thinking decision. Even things like basic player mobility were expanded upon intensely. Rooftops are now accessible, unlike the first game, which introduces a special kind of a verticality to the mix of one's strategy. And not to mention, it gives players a whole lot more ways to just move or explore the city, which is never a bad thing. Explosions also have a higher blast radius and are far more dangerous in general in this game than they were in GTA 1. When a car explodes or catches fire in GTA 2, you had better get out of there as fast as you can because they're often deadly, which means you should really keep this in mind when you're in police shootouts. And speaking of the police, this is also the first game that introduces the 6-star wanted level, and introduces the military coming in with each new star of notoriety gained, which is a feature that seemingly every GTA game after this would include. Perhaps what's also so striking despite the constant innovation is that this would ultimately not only be the last GTA map ever made by DMA Design, but also the last GTA game that resembles its original form in any way. Many of the key figures who had helped shape the first two games, designers like David Jones, the studio's founder, as well as Mike Daly, the studio's co-founder, would inevitably drift away from DMA/Rockstar after their work on GTA 2, leaving the Hauser brothers and a smaller core group of other talented developers and artists alike to redefine and to reshape the series in their own image. So, in that sense, GTA 2 isn't just a transitional moment in terms of game design, it's also sort of a farewell to DMA Design as it had once existed up until that point as well. At the time of GTA 2's production, however, I think it's also very important to remember that Rockstar Games was also a very different place. Dan Houser was still the co-founder and vice president of creativity at Rockstar Games, of course, but he wasn't yet the central creative figure he would later become, although his fingerprints were starting to become more and more visible as the years went on. The short intro that I discussed briefly earlier may not be directly connected to the game's story or characters in some kind of meaningful way here, but this was a test if anything, a way of seeing if Grand Theft Auto could be framed more cinematically, or if it could support these cinematic motifs if given the chance. As I'm sure we're all aware, Dan Houser would eventually go on to play a major part in guiding everything the studio made from GTA 3 in 2001 all the way to Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2018, before his departure from the studio in the late 2020, earning himself a one hell of a track record or a stat sheet in the process. One that itself began tracking all the way back in GTA 1's London in 1969 expansion pack. When I look back at GTA 2, I can't help but see not only him, but also his entire team/studio at the ground floor, working effortlessly sketching out ideas in a medium that feels like it's not yet ready for them, in one that will eventually have to buckle down and adjust the sails, so to speak, in order to keep up with the ideas of this company. If the original Grand Theft Auto was rough, messy, but still fun to play when everything was said and done, then GTA 2 feels like DMA Design's first attempt at crafting something resembling an actual open world. Instead of revisiting Liberty or Vice City, or any of the maps from the previous game now that I think about it, this game situates itself in a deliberately ambiguous sprawl of road networks with factories and smokestacks looming all over, polluting the occasional park or subway station as subtly as possible, almost invisible to the unassuming eye. With neon lights humming above alleyways and storefronts alike, and every district is carved up by the gangs who treat the city as both their home and battleground. Those gangs are the real personality of GTA 2, as well as its best attempt at a quote-unquote story. Where the first game reduced crime to anonymous point-chasing antics, here you're forced into focusing on your relationships with each gang while also doing, more or less, the same exact thing as the previous game, aka collecting as many points/money as possible in order to progress into the next zone or what have you. Aligning with the Zaibatsu Corporation, which is a cyberpunk-flavored conglomerate that's equal parts mafia and megacorp in vibes, and you'll earn better guns and juicier missions, but at the expense of alienating your opportunity to mess with other gangs, like the Lunatics for example, who are sort of like rivals of the Zaibatsu or whatever. And keep in mind, that's just one example of the two gangs I just gave. If I was here listing every one of them, we'd be here for a surprising amount of time considering how many there are in this game. Progression in GTA 2 isn't about climbing a single ladder per se, but rather it's about choosing which ladder to climb and which one to avoid, which is incredibly innovative if I may add. I know I've already said that a lot, but it gives the player a ton of narrative agency, almost as much as an RPG game might. That uniquely special kind of a push and pull of loyalty gives the game its structure, and it also feeds into its satire, in an almost Ouroboros kind of way. Quad Speed, your blank sheet of a protagonist, is never really given any kind of actual thought beyond his name and appearance, and the fact that he smokes a cigarette if he stands still for a while. He is practically faceless, voiceless, and interchangeable if we're being honest. And in that way, he sort of becomes the perfect vessel for a game that's about using and discarding identities as easily as stolen cars. The live-action intro anchors him just enough to feel like a real character, quote-unquote real, but its B-movie grit only makes the point clearer. You're not really special here, like at all. You're just another criminal hustling through a city where violence is the only common language, and the only language anyone is ever really willing to listen to. In a way, I kind of like the aspect of that opposed to the idea of a more centralized protagonist, even if it makes the narrative a little harder to follow, or absent entirely. In many ways, the atmosphere of GTA 2 defines itself more than its fragmented story ever could. The city operates as a small, fragile ecosystem, one where every single step you take threatens to topple somebody else's balance of power, and the game leans into that instability rather than smoothing it out or just simply ignoring it. The radio isn't just background noise either. It's also meant to be the city's voice, like a true radio station should be. That kind of detail gives Anywhere City a layer of texture it couldn't otherwise render from a top-down perspective, in my opinion. Even if the buildings still looked like cardboard cutouts from a certain angle, and all the people and pedestrians were still heavily pixelated, the soundscape alone suggested something larger, layered, and dare I even say, alive. The story, meanwhile, isn't really a story at all if I'm being honest. It's non-linear, fragmented by design, and almost entirely disposable. And yet, that disposability is kind of what makes it work. You don't need to enjoy the story of GTA 2 to enjoy playing GTA 2. And you've got to respect that simple fact at the end of the day. It even has a somewhat dedicated mod community. In GTA 2, you are not a hero figure, not even a named character beyond what the manual tells you. You're simply just an opportunist, someone who's trying to wring any kind of profit out of this crazy place and all this chaos as he can. It's a structure that kind of mirrors the game's tone, a cynical, self-aware, and never pretending that loyalty or morality matter when reputation points can be won or lost on a win, usually happening on a death. So, in that sense, GTA 2 is less about narrative and more about atmosphere in general, which I know is a pretty apt take, I'll give you that. But to rebuttal that, I say not everything is always complicated or intricate enough to be worthy of a different answer. GTA 2 is a relic from the past, a game built when arcade cabinets were still on their way out of the door in certain states and some parts of the world. It was made in the era of games when they were built practically, with the player's enjoyment in mind. GTA 2 is a crime thriller slash simulator by both nature and intention, yes, but it's mainly about immersing the player in a world that mocks itself and you in equal measure, more than it is about relaying some kind of impactful message for you to think about later. The GTA 2 is only worried about the present moment, and whether or not the player is having fun in that given moment. And if one area isn't giving you any kind of excitement or that kind of engagement you are wanting, then you have the complete agency and freedom as the player to move on to somewhere else that will, free of charge. For DMA Design, this was the last stop before the company's metabolic process truly began. Within 3 short years, from 1999 to 2001, the studio would fully transition into Rockstar North, hiring people like Laszlo Jones, Leslie Bennings, and many others who would later go on to be just as iconic as the Hauser brothers. GTA 2 sits on the metaphorical edge of that transformational phase. It's a game that is both a clear and deliberate product of the 90s, while also being a prototype for what the new century could offer at the same time. You can definitely feel the studio growing towards some kind of a philosophy, that a city could be more than a backdrop or a setting, that its systems and sounds and chaos could be fleshed out as a character just as much as the player character could be. Which kind of makes GTA 2 feel like it sits in this weird liminal space. It's a sequel that is definitely of its time and strangely predictive of the games that would dominate the next 2 decades, oddly enough. On one hand, you could give Rockstar props for foreseeing the future in a way, or you could hold the viewpoint that video games / the developers should have seen features like this as a necessity long before they actually did. It just depends on how you choose to view it, I guess. From my point of view, as someone who never played this game or the first one growing up, it's a very peculiar title in my opinion. It's not really remembered by the broader GTA fan base or with the same kind of reverence as literally every other GTA game that would come after it, but it also doesn't really need to be for it to still be fun or for it to still be appreciated, by me anyway. The quote-unquote value it offers is in the groundwork that it laid, and in the way that it took the messy, controversial thrill of the first game and gave it a new foundation that was sturdy enough to allow the series to grow into something far larger. I know it's very easy to dismiss GTA 2 as a more of the same when comparing it to its predecessor, as many of the critics did too upon its release, but these refinements that it offered marked an important step in the franchise's history. The DMA was finally starting to treat Grand Theft Auto as a structured, living system of mechanics that could support complexity and nuance in many ways. Looking back, GTA 2 wasn't trying to be cinematic or controversial. In some ways, it was just quietly stress testing the scaffolding of what an open world game could be, and it just so happened to hit the nail on the head in more ways than anybody will ever realize or give it credit for. Thanks for watching. Hey yo, what's going on everybody? Normally I put these kind of messages to my audience in the description of these videos, but I've pretty much realized that this is going to be the last video I'm uploading for 2025, and I just want to take this time to say thank you guys, seriously. I've made a few videos this year that I'm really proud of, and some that I feel like I could do better on, and if you've stuck around through most of them or any of them, I just want to say thank you and let you know that I really do appreciate you. I'm not gonna lie, I had like 2 videos I was trying to work on and get done by the end of December, but I feel like only this GTA 2 one is going to be done, so the next one will be at the start of the year, I imagine, or somewhere around that time. I also kind of want to like branch out more into like video essays and media reviews in general. Not that I'm ever going to like stop doing retrospectives or anything like that, but kind of expect that a little bit more in 2026 as well. And if you want me to, do any other kind of form of analysis or something like that, just put it in the comments, who knows? You might even see it on the channel one day. But I don't want to keep you here too long. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you. You are like literally the 1% of the audience that's going to do that. And I really can't appreciate you enough. I hope you guys have a wonderful Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year, everything, what have you. It'll probably be like a month or so before I upload again on this channel, but until then, I do have a gaming channel if you're interested. I know somebody said that I should stream on one of my community posts, and this little comment is like right for you. I don't stream on there a lot, but I do upload on there a lot more frequently than I do on this main channel. So, if you really like my content, there's that. And alright, like I said, later guys, hope you have a good one, stay safe, stay warm out there, it is currently 9 degrees in my house at the moment, or in my area, and I'll see you next time. Again, thanks for watching.